Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today we got a great guest. The guest is Joe Connelly. Joe and I are both on the ski patrol at Gore Mountain in upstate New York. That's where I met Joe. And Joe was a paramedic in New York City and before he moved up to North Country. And during this time, he wrote a book titled Bringing Out the Dead, which sort of chronicled his life as a paramedic in New York City during the time when New York City was a pretty brutal place from a crime and shooting perspective, et cetera. And lo and behold, Bringing Out the Dead, his book was made into a movie with the same title. And the movie stars Nicolas Cage, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese. So you can imagine it was one heck of a book and a super good movie, really, a top-notch list of people who were in that movie. And Joe moved to this small town in upstate New York, probably about 20 years ago, and he got involved with the local rescue squad, which at that time was 100% volunteer, not-for-profit rescue squad. And he joined it. I mean, he was a paramedic, so that's really a high level of skill. It's sort of the highest level of skill, pretty much, that you get on a rescue squad. And over the years, he's now assumed the role of president of the rescue squad, and he's been sort of transforming this 100% volunteer, not-for-profit organization, that serves a critical need for the community it's in, to a not-for-profit, but that has full-time paid paramedics and is now actually serving two communities. So I just thought this would be a great conversation about sort of organizational transformation and the challenges in sort of running and guiding a volunteer not-for-profit, where everyone in the community knows each other. And how do you transform that into one that's paid? And how do you deal with that transformation? And the motivation for doing this is that it increases the level of response. So the point there is that volunteer organization, you see this happening all through the EMS system. You see it happening on ski patrol. You see it happening in all ambulance squads, where they've moved from volunteers who, someone needs help, your pager would go off, and if you could respond, you'd respond to a much more, someone needs help, and they know that they can dispatch this crew to go help that person. So the response times have gone down. The skill level of the people providing the service has gone up. They've gone from, EMTs to paramedics. And so it's just sort of interesting. I thought from a business organizational transformation perspective, it would be a good conversation. So there we go.
Yeah, Bela, I love it. A little different than our typical guest, but something that's really important and really valuable to lots of communities all over the place. So let's get right to your interview with Joe Connelly.
Hey, Joe, good to see you again. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Bela. Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do this. Hey, so let me ask you a question. If you go to a social event in that big booming metropolis that you live in, up in North Creek, New York State, and you get introduced to somebody, and at the end of that introduction, they say to you, "Hey, Joe, nice to meet you. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
At the end of the conversation, they say, "Nice to meet you."
Yeah. No. After the introduction, they say, "Nice to meet you, Joe. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Well, I say, "Nice to meet you too, Bela." And then I usually try to steer the conversation to them. And I'm still a writer, journalist too, even though now I'm running an ambulance squad and a little business up here. So I'm very curious about other people. One of the things I love about still being a paramedic is going into their houses at this time of honesty and just finding out about them.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background. So you spent a part of your life being a writer. You wrote a pretty famous book called Bringing Out the Dead that got made into a pretty famous movie with some pretty famous actors and directors in it, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. I was a paramedic in New York City for 10 years. I kind of got into it after dropping out of college and moving around the country. And I always wanted to be a writer. And I thought being a paramedic would be a way of learning all those things about life and death that a writer should know. I just figured I'd do it for a year or two. But I ended up going into New York and going from an EMT to a paramedic. And it just took, I fell in love with the job and the energy of it and started writing these stories about my experience. This is New York City of the 80s, homicide records being set, I'm doing somebody shot or stabbed every night, and the AIDS crisis and the crack epidemic. And I didn't think anyone else out there was seeing this. I wanted to get it out, what I was experiencing, and this progress of starting to write a book, first in first person, and then gradually a fictional story. And it took a long time to do, but it was very successful. So that idea of getting that story out, because people didn't know, and I was kind of the first paramedic, first responder to bring that story forth. And just this succession of fortune, really. The book sold, and within a year, the script is written by Paul Schrader, and Martin Scorsese is on board. And a year after I sell the book, I am on the street, the same streets I worked on, but on a movie set now. And it was quite the experience. And I quit. So I quit my job right about then. I quit actually when I sold the movie deal. Mm-hmm. I left the offices of Paramount Pictures and said, I'm done. Thinking 12 years was enough, And then I moved up here. I went to a writer's colony up in the Adirondacks. Fell in love with it. Had two little kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I had two little kids and family, and moved up to North Creek, New York.
Yeah.
Wanted to ski, and so it had a winter life. And 3 months after I move up, 9/11 happens. All my friends are down there. I'm watching on TV, and I signed up with my local ambulance squad in North Creek, Johnsburg Emergency Squad. It said, how can I help? And that started this second story of my life, I guess.
Yeah. So that's great background. So what we want to try to focus on today is this notion. You're the president of Johnsburg Ambulance Squad now, and the notion of running a small not-for-profit business that's partially funded through insurance company payments of the patients that you transport, partially funded through the municipality, and how you've transformed that from a totally volunteer organization when you first joined to basically this small business today. So let's talk about that a little bit. Share some of your thoughts about that.
It's been an amazing 23 years since 2001 when I first came here and joined that all volunteer group. And it's, a local volunteer fire department or an ambulance squad. I mean, these people are real heroes. It's amazing. And when I was a paramedic in New York City, we laughed at people who would actually volunteer to do this, But you quickly fall in love with this idea of just going out and helping your neighbor, going out to all those houses you drive by and you wonder who lives there. And but at the same time, these organizations are real sort of social clubs, and they're completely member driven. and they usually have a captain, and it's the organization is very, idiosyncratic to the will of that group. And so my background and my history of being a medic in New York and writing a book, that was more a liability, I think, up here. And kind of right away, I was starting to see ways we could perhaps do a better job. It's heroic how many people, how much time they give, and to the calls up here. Some of those calls go for 3-4 hours. We live an hour or more away from the hospital. I have this huge area, 400 square miles, and so one call can just take a big chunk out of your day. Anyway, I finally figured out how many calls we were actually getting to. It was only about 60%. And so I went to the board and I said, if we started billing patients, we could probably get enough revenue to start paying some people to make sure we can cover these calls. And the board's answer to that was to say that I wasn't allowed to speak about this issue again. But they rotated out. A couple new people came in, and we started billing and paying a few people to cover, And since that point in 2003 or 4, we've covered just about every first call.
Yeah. So when you say only 60% were covered, that means that 6 out of 10 calls you folks responded to, but the other 4 calls, some neighboring ambulance squad had to come into town, so to speak, and take care of that injured person.
Correct. And so that ended, was a strain on the other towns.
Right.
Also, there is a for-profit ambulance company based, down in Glens Falls, 40 miles away, but they were coming up again, and it's just a long wait for the people who are calling. And standards of care were going up, and I was seeing, ways that we could improve our service here.
Yeah.
And keep a sense of community, in the squad. But that transition really over a period of 10 years from a completely member-driven group to an efficient small business nonprofit, based on all those different revenue sources and responsible to all those sources as well as the people. It's really quite a story. It's a book in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you and I are both on the ski patrol at Gore Mountain. That's where we met each other. And I've been in ski patrol for over 50 years on a dozen or so different patrols, and they're all very steeped in tradition. So change is a difficult thing to embrace, because that's not how we do it here. We've been doing it this way for a long, long time. Was it similar in the EMS realm? Sure.
Yeah, and it's not just the EMS, but in these small towns, they're small communities, and I don't want to be that guy who comes in here and starts telling people how they're supposed to be, when they've been running this squad and giving all this time, and they're all locals who've lived here a lot longer than me, and there was a lot to learn, like early on, those first few calls that I was going on, my partner, the driver, or whatever, would always say, "Oh, that's my cousin," or "That's my aunt." And I would say, "What coincidence," But over time, you realize everything's tied together in this town, and it deserves a lot of respect. And so it was a slow and careful evolution, and I think we kept a lot of the people. We lost a lot of people, as they lost more control of their control. And those bylaws which were originally like 20 pages and all based on the members' rights to make decisions, really needed to change. Sorry, that's Sonny. It's 5 months old. You may hear more from him.
Sonny's a dog, by the way. just to be clear.
He's a little shepherd. Yeah.
So as you reflect back on that transition from a volunteer organization steeped in tradition to where you are now, do you have like 2 or 3 kind of key lessons learned from that experience?
I think one of the biggest moves for us was to move away from a board that was all members to, we gradually started bringing in people with authority, with knowledge about running a small business. There are so many different aspects of running an emergency squad. Like you said, we're responsible to the town because a significant amount of money comes from taxes. We're responsible to the insurance companies, and we have to live by these wild swings of call volume and revenue volume. And then there's the Department of Health, New York State, and all of its requirements. And then I have this staff, many of whom feel very privileged, who were part of the volunteer group before, and still want to do things completely their own way. Anyway, to get back to the board, I was able to bring in a doctor, a local physician, and was able to bring in a former town supervisor, to advise me on the municipal side of it. I was able to bring in a fantastic grant writer. And it was hard moving that through. But those board members are so helpful. And just last week, we brought in a guy who's a former CEO of a hospital who right away was able to give me 10 good points, of just looking over our finances. And he's going to make such a big difference because it's all about getting more efficient while at the same time not weakening our care, our response.
Yeah, so I can imagine that you're constantly trying to find the right balance between providing a high level of care to people who are sick or injured and taking care of them, and at the same time knowing that you have a finite set of resources, and resources being not just dollars but people and equipment. So it's a constant juggle of how do I do this? And as you said, the call volume is not constant, it's highly variable, and it's highly variable within a 2-hour span, right? You can have nothing for 6 hours, and then in an hour you'll have 3 calls.
Right. I know. And I have to be careful. Like most businesses, you generate more profits or non-profits or more revenue by going out there and selling yourself, but right. I can't go running people over in the street.
Yeah, it's been a slow day.
Rely on them to call us.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we have a great group of really qualified people. We were able to build a new building. It's right in the center of town. We have 3 very new ambulances, and that's just because I think of the gradual progression of our abilities and the respect that it's gotten in the town, because over time, just about every house ends up calling for us at one point or another, and us having a quick and quality response and showing up there just means so much. And it means so much that it's generally somebody they know, who's
Right.
from around here. And eventually when I have to go and ask for those taxes, like we did just this last year, we had quite a big bump. It's for the first time we're able to give health insurance. Big thing. It was an almost overwhelming yes by those board members, the town board members, and the people in the crowd. It's very impressive and very rewarding,
Yeah. Yeah. Is there so let me get back to, because I think businesses struggle with this, particularly ones that have sort of this unequal demand, right? You might be in the restaurant business, but in the restaurant business from 4 to 8, you're going to be slammed, and the rest of the time you're not super busy. It's sort of predictable. It may be cyclical, but it's sort of a predictable cycle. Whereas what you guys do, I mean, yeah, if there's icy roads or something, yeah, you're going to get a bunch of car accidents, but sort of on a daily basis, how do you even think about staffing, right? Do I staff one crew? Do I staff 2 crews? Do you use historical information and data? How do you sort of figure out what the right thing to do there is? Because if you staff too many crews, someone's going to criticize, hey, you're wasting money.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good tipping point, is the one crew. And that one crew for us is a paramedic and an EMT. Paramedic is advanced life support and EMT is basic life support. And that provides the standard of care. With an ambulance is with equipment, a lot of it's very expensive. But if I can have that crew, and then we look at what's the busy time. So Gore Mountain, the ski season is our big time. And so we were able to get Gore to give us some money, the Olympic Regional Development Association, enough to pay for second crews, and those second crews on weekends and holidays. And we think that that's kind of a fine point. We also have a strong mutual aid system with neighboring towns. We go to them and they come to us. But, for the last 15, almost 20 years, we've had that number one crew on duty in the building, ready to go.
And they're on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
So your coverage. Yeah.
Right. And that's how you got to sell it. You can't sell this business as by the people who are calling for you. You got to sell it to us. I tell the town it's a cost of readiness, because that insurance does not pay enough from the call volume we get to cover all those expenses. And that's how I sell it to the municipalities. We also got a second town now we're contracted with, Minerva, and our cost of readiness is probably $2,000 a call if you divide it into that. Yeah. Whereas the typical Medicaid will pay $200 a call, and Medicare is $800 a call, right? So how are we going to keep that crew here? We got to rely on taxpayers, and so we have to really sell this to the townspeople, and that starts with providing that service, and being there and doing a good job, and just compassion. So important.
Yeah. Now, the other interesting thing about this business is that, as you mentioned, you're an hour's drive away from a hospital. So if you get a call, that crew is gone for 3 hours.
Right.
Right. So you're out of service for 3 hours. So now you have to backfill for that 3-hour chunk. And, that's it's not like you're 5 minutes from the hospital. and it's, this adds like a whole other degree of complexity about it.
Right.
How do you sort of manage that? Is that all through mutual aid, or do you have a backup crew? Do you have like a crew that's sort of on backup and say, okay, when the first crew goes out, okay, you guys are now on call and you're ready to go?
So, and this is another strange part about my business of going from this volunteer to now we're all professionals, right? And back in those volunteer days, everybody from town, we scrambled, to cover that, get that second call that would come out while the first crew was out, or third call sometimes, or even fourth call. And that was great. It was a great spirit. It was a great teamwork, but as we become professionals, it's much more of a business now. And so I don't have those people scrambling to come out. Generally, it's me and a couple others who still have that old spirit.
Yeah.
And still love the job, still love going out to your neighbor and making that difference. So it's a challenge, certainly. Keeping that spirit, that community volunteer spirit, even though all of us are heavily trained and now pretty well paid, deserve that respect as professionals. Sometimes, they're like the way I was in New York City, right? It was like, I'm getting paid to do this, and when my shift is over, my shift is over.
Right. It's a job.
Me.
Yeah.
Leave.
Yeah.
He says the same thing. He feels the same way.
Yeah. So how do you sort of think about where the next 5 years is going in sort of this business?
I think that EMS is going to expand its role, and it's long overdue. And there's this idea, I don't know if you know about community paramedicine. So these EMS, it's not just about when you call 911, but hopefully it's those medics and EMTs going to your house before you call, checking for risk factors, doing telehealth, being the eyes and ears of the doctors and the local health clinic and the hospital, doing follow-ups. We take you down, but we can be there when you come back and make sure you're set in your house and that you've got all you need. And there's been a big push for that lately, and finally it's getting the funding. I haven't seen the funding, but that's what's been holding us back. I think because we have the time to do it, we have the duty crew, we have the management system, And to go back to your question about the big difference, I think in the transition of hiring management, there wasn't any management. So I was president back in 2000s. I wasn't getting paid, and in most small businesses, I think the more you get involved in efficiency, the more time, the more it opens up, the more inefficiencies open up, right? And so in 2014, I started to get a salary, and my captain did too, and that was a big help.
Yeah. Yeah. So this notion of community medicine, did you call it? What was the name? Not community medicine. You got a name for it.
Community paramedicine, right?
Paramedicine.
And having a management system to be able to do that. So we're hoping to set one up in Minerva, the neighboring town that we also contract with, and to have a full-time person there who can not only respond to calls, be a first responder, but someone who's local, knows the people, is able to risk assessment, follow up, telehealth, and also connecting to resources, being a sort of center, community-based center, to say this is a housing situation, or what, this person's not getting enough food. Right. Who can we contact, put them in touch with?
Right. So that's a really wonderful idea, right? Because you're moving from a responding to a crisis to sort of trying to help prevent these crises from happening, because there's lots of examples of individuals who are older, maybe living alone, and and paramedics are really highly skilled people, right? A paramedic can do a lot of stuff and is really well trained. It's a high level of skill, and to figure out how to utilize that skill in a broader context, I think is really interesting. Is that sort of a national trend that's going on, or is that more of a New York State thing?
Oh, it's definitely more national. I would say we're behind the curve on this. But in the governor's recent state of the state, she talked about, first of all, making EMS an essential service, making it equivalent to police and fire, which it's never been here. But also she talked about this push, and there's a ton of federal Medicaid dollars that are coming in support of this idea. And especially in a place as rural as we are.
Yeah.
Which is hard to reach. People get isolated, you know, and the paramedics, we get to know these people. Many times they call frequently, and those are the people who we can really step in, I think, change the course.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So, Joe, what things haven't I asked you, or haven't we talked about, that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I think we covered a lot. I wish I could just describe how rewarding I find this job. And it's tough. The pandemic was really tough on us. And it feels like it's been the last 3 years. The pressure that came with that just hadn't let up. And the staffing issues just made things, just added so much pressure on us. But I do feel like the sun is coming up now, and we are starting to get those people in. We got the money we needed, and we're on a good path now. But it's an incredibly rewarding job, but at the same time, it can be very stressful on the people who do it. And that's something I'd like to bring out too.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, tough thing to manage. We have all these, employee assistance programs, for people to reach out to help, but many times they don't.
Yeah.
You got to be able to recognize when people are struggling. That's part of the job.
Yeah. Is there a national or regional organization of rural EMS presidents that gets together, periodically to sort of share some of these concerns that exist in sort of the rural medicine piece, the rural EMS piece?
There are, and I've been to a few of those meetings. Generally it happens at conferences.
Yeah.
But I think the governor has established these zones. And so the North Country, where we are, has its own zone, and will have its own sponsor organization, which will be the connector, for all of us. And the idea is to do, and the gatherer of the data, the sort of leader for all of us to turn to and go to. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's certainly very different from working on the streets of Hell's Kitchen. It's an hour to the hospital, and you learn so much more about your patient and what you're doing in that hour time than just being able to rush them into the emergency room in New York City, which is 10 minutes away.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a shortage of people to staff the ambulance corps?
Major shortage. Yep. Because like I said, the job is stressful. And it traditionally hasn't paid well. That pay is just starting to come up. Benefits are just coming out, and it's comes from the urban areas. The suburbs were the first to kind of turn over and start paying better and that. But and there was this movement of EMS to those where the pay was better. We couldn't keep up with a lot of that.
Yeah.
And there's towns more rural than I am that are just hemorrhaging their EMS people.
Yeah.
I do think that we've turned a corner here. Other towns too, we're all kind of going together. It's it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And I've been just responding. I have the pager on all the time, and it's a lot for us. And I do think though we've got the good people in. We're getting more.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about. So on ski patrol, where we know each other from, there's a group of people who are paid to do that job, and there's a group of us who are volunteers that don't get paid.
Right.
And it's hard to tell the difference. We work together. At least it feels that way to me. And do you have both paid and volunteer people working at the Johnsburg EMS?
We did initially, when we started doing it, we had to. We didn't have the resources. But probably 10 years ago or more, we had to go to all paid.
Got it.
So just because of the Department of Labor rules on trying to have somebody volunteer in the same shift that could be a paid person, and you have paid people saying, I would work that. And at the same time, there's just fewer and fewer volunteers.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a book now about rural EMS, and it's called Volunteers. And it's a special group of people who do this and don't get reimbursed. And,
yeah.
I'm just trying to remember that.
Yeah. Did that transit? What type of challenges did that transition bring when you had some people who were paid and some people who were volunteers? What type of challenges did you have to deal with in making that transition? When I think about challenges, I think about the people challenges, not financial. I'm thinking about the people management challenges.
Yeah, and that's all part of that same transition from the member-driven organization. Those people who felt like gave so much, and you have to recognize them for that.
Right.
And then you tell them, oh, we're going to fill your shift, with this paid person. Or you're welcome to come now, keep that shift, but you're going to be paid now. That's not the answer they want to hear. You think, oh yeah, well, it's great being paid, but a lot of people, they wanted to hold on to that spirit, that team and that giving part, because it is so rewarding, and it's their identity, So sure, a lot of people left. Some people left angrily.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, change is always a challenging thing in any organization, right? And clearly your organization that you're running has gone through this massive change, from being all volunteer to all paid. The funding sources have changed. Regulations just keep increasing. Yeah. And the standard of care keeps going up. So in many ways, it's becoming harder and harder for it's becoming more challenging for a volunteer, because the sort of ticket to become an EMT or to become a paramedic is a pretty high ticket to get. Yeah. And it's a lot of training, and it's, so people only have so much time. And striking this balance is, man, you've done an amazing job in sort of walking that tightrope in moving this organization along. My hat's off to you, Joe.
Thanks, Bela. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I have a lot of respect for what you've done too, and just being a mentor in a way up there on the hill.
Oh, well, thank you.
Big help.
Thank you very much. So you have a new book you're working on. Can you give us a glimpse into it?
It's about a car crash in a small town, and how all the responders know the people who involved in the crash, and how a tragedy like that makes everybody sick. Affects the whole town.
Yeah.
And then really affects those people who are trying to help, and can push them away. But at the same time, when they find a way to come back, they can be the healers for the rest of the town as well.
Very nice.
And it's kind of this idea too of trying to find a way to keep that from happening again.
Yeah.
Since the car crash in this case is kind of driven by mental health issues, which is just a big thing, and there's just not that much mental health care up here.
Right.
And it's a lot of people just kind of supporting each other.
Yeah. That sounds like it's going to be a great book. So, hey, remind our listeners of your other book, its title, and where can people get it?
Bringing Out the Dead is it's on Amazon. I think it's probably in a lot of bookstores still. Yeah, it was put out by Random House, and the movie's of the same name. You can still find it out there streaming somewhere.
Yeah, I looked it up last night. It's available. You can get the movie, and the book is on Amazon. So Bringing Out the Dead, both the book and the movie. I will make sure that information is in the show notes. Before we close here, Joe, is there anything else you wanted to add to this?
No, Bella. No, I thanks a lot for having me. This is really important to me, this EMS service.
Yeah, well, it shows, man. It really shows, right? And I'll tell you, having utilized the service on occasion, once up there in Johnsburg, and once down here where I live in Queensbury, I'm very, very thankful to the people who are devoted like yourself and provide this service to sometimes people but sometimes complete strangers who you're going to see for an hour or two and never see again.
Right.
But you're pouring your heart and all your expertise and skill into it. So that's wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Sure.
Bela, that was really interesting. And this is a totally cool entrepreneurial story. This is a guy who's running a small nonprofit organization that's an important part of villages, towns, and cities all throughout the US. I think we're all familiar with these types of organizations. I think a lot of us take them for granted, and hopefully will not after this interview. But from a cool standpoint of, as you said in the opening, kind of an organizational transformation standpoint, totally cool. But even as the sociology of this type of organization, what's the role in the local community? What are the bonds between the people who serve in these organizations? I think it was just a fascinating story, and one that that really needs to be told. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, so this is a really rich topic, I think. Volunteer organizations sort of have their own sets of challenges. One is staffing them, getting people to join. And in the EMS world, the emergency medical services world, the skill requirement to get in continues to go up and up and up and up. So sort of the standard of care that they're providing is it keeps increasing. I mean, I'll just tell you a story. 50 plus years ago, when I joined the ski patrol, I took a first aid course, and this was the standard in those days. And it was a book that was the pages were 8 by 5. So it wasn't even an 8.5 by 11 size book. It was a smaller book, and it had maybe 90 pages in it, and it was like a 20-hour course. And now, if you want to be a ski patroller, it's about a 125-hour course to get on. So as the requirements keep getting higher, it gets more and more challenging to get people to volunteer, because it's like, oh my God, I got to take a 120-hour course. I mean, that's longer than a 3-credit course, right? If you think about the amount of hours, a typical 3-credit-hour course meets for what, 45 hours a semester, class time, right? This is 125 hours. And a paramedic is like 2 years of college to become a paramedic. So it becomes harder and harder to ask volunteers to do that. And that's going through the fire service. Volunteer fire companies have the same problem. EMS organizations throughout the country have that same problem. So that's a real challenge. The other interesting piece is that I think in these organizations, there's a lot of emotional attachment to the organization. I see it in ski patrol. People get really emotionally attached. And as such, oftentimes tradition is very important. This is how we do things here. And in my 50 plus year as a ski patroller, I've been on a half dozen or 8 different ski patrols, and each one had its own culture. They all provided the same sort of service to the public, but they all had their own sort of culture and way of doing things, way of organizing, etc. And man, change was really a challenge. So I think, and in the EMS service, as Joe was talking about, they need to provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week coverage. And up in where they are located, as I think we talked in the podcast, if the squad gets a call and they have to transport someone to the hospital, they're gone for 3 hours. So for those 3 hours, you have no coverage in town. So, just managing those things, I think is a real challenge. And to me, those were the big takeaways. And I think what's happening and what we're seeing is that the level of skill and having to go to paying people, because that's the only way you can get them to sort of do this, so that you have 24/7 coverage, is the trend that seems to be going that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that if people weren't aware before, we've made it evidently clear to our listeners that these little nonprofits are critically important to small towns all over the US. And there are some medium-sized cities that still rely on the volunteer model too, as far as I know.
Yes.
What do you think is, we like to, in entrepreneurship, talk about scalability, right, in the VC world. What's scalable here? What's transferable here from Joe's experience that you think other organizations should be looking at? Do we need a movement to make these organizations more entrepreneurial? And what are the downsides of that? Should educational institutions be offering more programs for nonprofits like this? What's your sense of the landscape right now?
I think in the short number of years I worked in higher ed, I think I only saw one course on non-for-profit management and its challenges. Right. I've seen a lot of business courses, but I think there was just one course at some school that I talked to somebody who taught such a course. I think it has its challenges. So I do think that we should, as an educational system, we should think about making sure that we're servicing that part of the economy, because it's huge. Think about the soup kitchen. And we've had other guests on this show, the person who runs the homeless shelter in Schenectady. Right. Those are not for profits. And so they have all sorts of challenges, not just staffing, but fundraising, because you have no income. So how do you sort of, survive and provide your service? So I think there is an opportunity there. I think there's a bit of a vacuum there in higher ed. Maybe it's at the community college level, maybe it's at the four-year institutions. I don't know, but I think there is opportunity there. And most of these organizations are small entrepreneurial organizations. The National Red Cross, yeah, that's a big organization, but that's not what I'm talking about. The soup kitchen is, 15 people who make that run. And it's probably, of those 15, it's 5 who do 80% of the work. The same thing is true at the homeless shelter. The same thing is true at, a lot of these types of organizations. So I think you're right. I think there is opportunity there.
Yeah, I think he's got a really cool roadmap to help transformation and change management is the key. And if you look at the increased demand and the lack of supply and the lack of funding, there's a huge kind of gap here. And I really think this kind of leadership that Joe is showing, right, is something that would be great if somebody maybe that's listening can really pick up on this and say, hey, let's turn this into a national curriculum, or let's turn this into something that we can offer to these to these small ambulance companies and volunteer fire departments and things like this, and really systematize it and make it easy for it to scale, make it easy for people to access this information. And once you see, hey, other people are doing this too, it's okay to change. It's important. And you can see the stories of people who go through the process of transforming their organization from a nonprofit volunteer to paying people to do it. And they see might not be exactly the same way, but people still are enjoying serving in it. There's still the sense of community. There's still the sense of family. That the other side of these changes is also good. It doesn't turn into, McDonald's, right? And everybody's wearing polyester uniforms, and that's not fair to people who work at McDonald's, right? But that we turn into robots, right?
Right.
That are no profit. We can still care about our neighbors and have fun together, right? But do it in a way that serves the community better, faster response times, right? Higher qualities of care. You can kind of do win-wins with this. It sounds to me like. So I was fascinated by this whole experience. I thought that this is a model that I hope lots of people can pay attention to and adopt elements of what Joe's done there in upstate.
Yeah. As you were saying that, Mike, one of the things I was thinking about was the ski patrol is this interesting example of blending people who are paid and people who are volunteer. So where I'm at Gore Mountain, we have a paid staff that's there every day. And in the ski business, it's super busy on Saturday and Sunday and holidays, but Monday through Friday during the week, it's not very busy. So a lot of volunteers, people who have other jobs, can work on Saturdays and Sundays. So the volunteers come in and supplement the sort of paid staff on the weekends for the most part. And that works very well. And interestingly enough, again, all the different ski patrols I've been on, at Gore Mountain, you cannot tell the difference between a paid person and a volunteer person. We wear the same uniform, we look the same, we act the same, we do the same jobs. And I've been on other ski patrols where there was a much more obvious divide. The paid staff wore a different color uniform than the volunteer staff. And it has its pluses and minuses. One can argue either way. But I'll tell you, from my perspective, I like the Gore model much better in that, first of all, the customer can't tell the difference, right? Which and there is no difference in the skill level. There is no difference in the requirements to become a ski patrol. The requirement is the same. The only difference is somebody's doing that as a job, Monday through Friday or whatever 5 days a week they do. And other people are doing it as volunteers. So I think there's also something to be learned from that. Is there an opportunity that you can maintain this blend of both volunteer and paid people, which maybe the business will allow you to do that because you have certain sort of busy times and less busy times.
Yeah, I love it. It's use what we know about peak staffing and what we've learned in logistics industries and things like this to apply data to solving these problems. Just because it's a small town organization doesn't mean that we can't apply a little bit of data analysis and science to something to help us do our jobs better. And answering tough questions like what kind of mix would work, we can model this, we can figure this out and look at different options. And some of the stuff with change is do it as an experiment, right? Hire one person for 2 years, right? Sign one contract and measure the results. See what happens, right? Does it improve response time? Does it improve quality of care, right? These are cool things that maybe people who are a little resistant to change can try to embrace, trying a few things differently to see if it makes it better for the communities they're serving. So I think to me, that's just what you said is really important that people start to look at some of these issues these ways, that let's look at them as problems to be solved and change we can embrace rather than, we've always done things this way. So, let's keep doing it the way we're doing it. There's lots of different examples of models where it's worked. Ski Patrol is one great one, right? Where the mixed model works. Let's try it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Sounds good, Mike. What do you think? Time to wrap this one up?
Yeah, let's call it a day. Listeners, thanks for yet another interesting entrepreneurial interview with us. And Bela, thanks for, as usual, conducting the interview with your usual vigor. We hope you found this episode interesting and thought-provoking. And of course, if you have questions about what we've discussed, we always encourage you to please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.mike@gmail.com.
Hey, and please hit if you enjoy the podcast, please hit the follow button on your favorite podcasting application. And hey, just want to let you know that these are also now available on YouTube. So if you prefer to listen and or watch on YouTube, that's available as well. just say it, just search for the unconventional path, and it'll pop up. So signing off from upstate New York. So until next time, see you all soon.
Thanks, Bela. And from a guy who's got a face that's made for radio. So, go to YouTube at your own peril. But from over here in Münster, Germany, we'll see everybody next time.